Welcome back to The Price of Business. I'm your host, Kevin Price, talking to you about you and your business. Hessam Parzivand, he's a regular on the show, but we haven't seen you in forever. I hadn't seen you since last year because you've been so incredibly busy. And I tell you, I'm very excited for you. I'm happy that you're just busy. And the firm you have is the Parz firm. That's PARZFIRM.com. That's how you learn more about it. It's the Parzivand firm. But tell us about how busy you've been.
Well, it's I've had some cases that one case in particular that's going to be going to trial in March, so that's kind of kept me busy. And and also I've actually did a speaking engagement in January for the Fort Bend bar. Had a good time talking about overtime law with them. So it's been a little bit hectic, but still working through it. Trying to hire on a little bit more to help work with the workload.
That's exactly what you want to be, is busy.
Exactly, yeah. No, definitely beats the alternative. There's no doubt about that.
Poverty, right? That's the alternative is poverty. So, yeah, and so I'm excited for you, but we've missed having you on the show. We're glad to have you back. Very interesting conversation before we got started about the Americans with Disability Act, and we're going to focus a little bit on that. And, and this is one of those laws that are so incredibly crucial, and impactful, and yet also very challenging for business owners. When they're they've got limited money, unlike government, which acts like it has unlimited money. If it needs more, it just goes into deficit spending mode. Businesses can't do that, and so the onerous effect of regulations is really a challenge. And so, talk a little bit. First of all, explain ADA.
So the Americans with Disabilities Act is not what you think. In terms of, we think of disabilities more in the pejorative sense of somebody who's in a wheelchair or something to that effect. But in this particular circumstance, we're going to be talking about mental health impairments. It's critical to note that the Americans with Disabilities Act was expanded in 2008 by W. Bush. And as a result of that, a lot of issues such as diabetes, a lot of cancer, and a lot of mental health impairments are covered under the Americans with Disabilities Act. And basically what it says is if you have an impairment, your employer has to offer a reasonable accommodation if it would not cause an undue hardship on that employer. So I'm going to give you some examples because I think examples kind of speak a little bit more clearly than for me to kind of go in and basically read you the law.
Yeah.
So, for example, if you're an employer with over 15 employees and you had a secretary who has PTSD, who had been carjacked at night several years ago, and she experiences anxiety driving after dark, a potential reasonable accommodation for that secretary in that circumstance would be to allow them to come and leave work during sunlight, as opposed to forcing them to work, let's say, in the wintertime until 5 o'clock and drive in the dark.
Right.
For example, a cashier with a sleep disorder who works at a retail store but cannot get up consistently in the morning due to medication that he may take, you could assign the cashier shifts in the afternoon. Another example of a kind of a mental health impairment situation is a court clerk with social anxiety disorder whose disorder acts up if she works customer service too frequently. This was actually based on a case that went up to an appellate court, and you could assign that court clerk available tasks that required paperwork and didn't necessarily require customer service interaction. So those are kind of some examples, and it is very, very heavily tailored to the situation, which is why it's important when businesses hear about these requests. A person, in order to make a request for accommodation, they really don't have to do much. They just have to say, well, I have this disorder and it's affecting my work. And
so they don't need any medical doctor verification.
Well, there is a whole process, and I don't want to get into that. There is a whole process in terms of getting verification from doctors and everything else, and whether it's a proper inquiry under the ADA. Mm-hmm. So, ideally, what should be happening is that healthcare providers and employers should be kind of engaging in a dialogue to work out how do we accommodate these people. And the reason why I actually picked this topic is that at my Fort Bend Bar CLE, I was asked a question about Alzheimer's and whether Alzheimer's could be accommodated under the Americans with Disabilities Act. And unfortunately, I haven't found any case law. I've done some additional research to see. Haven't found any case law. And because I'm not a medical doctor and I don't know exactly all of the manifestations of Alzheimer's, I don't want to necessarily comment. But I would think, at least based on my knowledge of what stereotypically Alzheimer's involves, that at least at the early stages, such activities like providing checklists for a person or something to that effect may be sufficient to...
Yeah, I guess it would depend entirely on what they did for a living.
Correct.
If they're a medical doctor, they're totally liable for malpractice. If they
right.
know they're, if they're an attorney, good luck with that as an attorney,
right.
Trying to operate with Alzheimer's. The list goes on. So I guess it would be predicated, but that's probably the case with all ADA deals.
Right, it is, and that's the point of it is that it's a reasonable accommodation. If you're a mom and pop store and you have 5 cashiers, your reasonable accommodation is going to be different. That doesn't cause an undue hardship is going to be different from a Walmart who has thousands of cashiers. So and obviously it depends. A manufacturing worker with Alzheimer's, you could imagine that maybe somebody who worked on the factory floor could manage to do their job with Alzheimer's.
Depending on what it was, yeah.
Depending on what it was, but obviously a profession that required a lot of thinking, such as accounting or law, that would be a much tougher sell.
I think the moment that you would know, it's time to challenge whether or not you should continue doing that. If you're in those kind of professional fields, obviously. And do they make accommodations for smaller businesses that they don't for larger businesses?
Well, the question under the act is you have to give a reasonable accommodation that's not an undue hardship for your business. So
balancing act.
Yeah, so it's a balancing act, and that's why it's important to consult with a lawyer on these issues, somebody who's familiar.
That's why if you can get 1099s and not W-2s, get 1099s. This is a part of the challenge for small business owners. This is why you're seeing W-2s evaporate over the last couple of years, even as the government tries to force businesses to make them W-2s.
Right. I think, if you have somebody who's coming into your office on a regular basis, a normal rank and file employee, I think it's going to be really, really hard to 1099 them. And I do think that we're going to see increased application of W-2 to even remote workers, because it's the equivalent of if I'm sitting in the office being remote, at this point with the technology we have. So I definitely don't suggest using 1099s too broadly, because you can end up in some overtime issues,
a whole different other set of problems.
Right. Yeah. And obviously the IRS could go after you too for that reason. But yeah, I mean it does signal why these issues are among the issues that are probably causing people. But I think whenever I talk to employers and they talk about their justification for 1099ing, they're not thinking as far as trying to defend against employment law claims. They don't want to pay that 7% for employer side taxes,
right?
Exactly. The FICA.
Yeah, but I think there's liability involved that isn't involved with a 1099 as well.
Correct.
Just a list, of liability. So Hessam, the final takeaway with about a minute left for the listener.
Well, the final takeaway, in all honesty, is don't brush off these mental health conditions, and also watch out for people who have a record of impairment. Like, for example, you couldn't discriminate against a former alcoholic. He can't be denied his a driving job because he's a former alcoholic. Or don't watch out with what you say when you fire somebody too, because if you fire, the ADA also covers people who have perceived disabilities. So if you fire somebody and say, "Oh my God, that person seems so schizophrenic," you're technically that's a violation of the law, because you're
Wow.
firing them based on having a perceived disability. And I've actually had a case that settled very, very early because of a situation kind of similar to that.
Wow. Got to wrap it up with that. And your website one more time?
Sure, it's parzfirm.com.
parzfirm.com. Check him out. He's outstanding in employment law, and we're delighted to have you on the program and look forward to seeing you again soon.
Thank you so much.
Don't be such a stranger for so long.
I won't.
And also, we're going to be getting you on a TV show soon, I understand, too. We're looking forward to that.
I'm looking forward to it as well.
All right. When we come back, much more for you. Do want to remind you best content here, including this interview, will be found over there at the national news website, usdailyreview.com. And this is The Price of Business.